All right, so this is our session number 4 on APIs. In last 3 sessions, we talked about what is SOA, we talked about what are web services, we talked about XML, we talked about XSD, we talked about Visual, we talked about namespaces, right? So the last session was primarily on namespaces, how those prefixes are added to the elements, right? What are default namespaces? What are target namespaces? Why do we need a prefix, right? So all those things we looked at. I hope you guys got a chance to look at the session videos. If you haven't seen it yet, please go through it because sometimes you cannot grasp that concept in one go. But if you see it couple of times, maybe your understanding will become better. So today's session will be more like about two things: consuming soap services and exposing soap services. Right. So these are the two things we'll see in today's session, that how can we consume the soap services and how can we expose the soap services, and these two things from Boomi standpoint, right? And from the next session, it will be all about rest. This should be the last session on the soap. So when you're in the Boomi world, right? Or when you're in the integration world, so you will hear about APIs a lot, right? What does API stand for? Application Programming Interface. Yeah. And so it is an entity or which abstracts the complexity or underlying complexity, but exposes a uniform methodology to interact with the outside world. Okay, so we have been hearing about APIs, right? I'll talk in detail about API, but just want to tell you, like, API stands for Application Programming Interface, and this is not a new word. Okay, this API, even if you're working on Java or maybe on PHP or any other programming language for that matter, right? Everywhere we will hear about APIs. So it is a mechanism which makes two applications to talk to each other, right? It is a mechanism which makes two applications to talk to each other, or two different entities to talk to each other without knowing the underlying complexity, right? You go to the ATM and there is an interface over there, right? There is a barcode reader, right? Where you go and you swipe your card that reads your details, and after that all your interaction with that hardware and the software starts, right? Do you know what how much line of how many lines of codes have they written behind the scene? uh, what all programs are getting executed? You don't care, right, whether the underlying program is written in Java, .NET, PHP. Does it really matter to us? It doesn't matter to us, right? We have some interface. We go and just make sure that our request goes to that interface in a mechanism or in a way which is legitimate for the interface, right? So let's say you go to ICIC, or let's say you go to an ATM and you swipe a card which is already expired. Will it work? It won't work, right? Because you are not interfacing or you are not binding in the right way. But the moment you kind of communicate, try to bind in a right way, after that you don't need to know the underlying complexity, right? So if you go and you swipe your company ID card, will it work in ATM? It will not work in ATM, right? Because you are not interfacing in the right way. So the point I'm trying to communicate is, application programming interface is a mechanism that allows two different programs running on two different machines or maybe on the same machines to talk to each other without knowing the underlying complexity, right? So I don't want people to know underlying complexity, but still I want that any third party should be able to talk to my program. Then what do I do is I write interfaces. Okay, so that interface will just tell you that how should you communicate, and you don't need to know the underlying things, right? So one simple exam, or you can say like your functions, right? Your methods, these are kind of interfaces. Or else if you know a little bit about Java. There we have some concept of interface, and there we have some concept of class, right? If you see the definition of interface, they will also call it as a special type of class, which is fine. So do we, anyone who has idea about Java, do we define the methods in interface? Do we have the definitions or declaration?
Declarations.
We do not have any kind of definitions in the interface. Okay, we just declared certain standards. We say that this is going to be my method name, this is going to be the return type, this is going to be the parameter name, that's all. And that helps the different end parties to know that what is the right mechanism to talk to this interface. And behind the scene there might be a lot of classes which are written, those have the implementation logic. But from the interfacing standpoint, you just need to know the boundary level details. Interface, if you will see, the literal meaning of interface is like a boundary. Okay, so for example, let's take an example of your laptop, right? There are different sockets in your laptop to put in your web this pen drive or memory card and all, right? So when you have to just plug in the pen drive, right? Behind the scene there are a lot of things which are happening. So your pen drive and your laptop are two different hardwares, yes or no? But then the moment you plug in, they start communicating with each other, right? So the interface, that socket is an interface, right? Isn't it? That socket is an interface. It is a mechanism which is letting other hardware to interact with an laptop, which is hardware in itself, right? And then they can communicate with each other, right? Isn't it? So your API is a similar thing, but at the programming level. Your API is a similar thing at a programming level. Take an example of television, right? You have a start and stop button. So that is kind of an interface for you to talk to that, or you have a remote, right? That is an interface which helps you to talk to the television. You don't need to know the underlying complexity. Similarly, in the programming world, APIs are the mechanisms to expose certain business functionality. Okay, it is a mechanism. I'll write one more definition. It is a mechanism that allows two different programs to talk to each other, or it allows to expose certain business functionality, abstracting the underlying complexity. So we are kind of hiding the underlying complexity, but we are exposing certain business functionality, and that's what interface does, right? So application program. So there is an application, right, where we have a lot of logic, and if you want to basically talk to that logic, if you want to access some functionality, there are certain interfaces written where which will help you to talk to that business functionality, which will help you to that access that business functionality without knowing the underlying complexity, right? So there are different speculations in the market about APIs, and since the time this cloud has come, these APIs have become all the more important. But this is not something which is new; it has been there for decades. And but now, since we are talking things or applications which are on the cloud, and APIs are more recommended way to talk to the applications which are on the cloud, that's why these have gained all the more popularity. And APIs is not only about REST and SOAP. Okay, it does not mean API is only about REST and SOAP. There are different types of APIs we have. We may have Linux APIs, we may have PL SQL API. So there are a lot of APIs, anything which will help you to get your task done without knowing the underlying complexity, that is considered as an API. But when we are talking about the communication over the web, right, these REST and SOAP APIs are the ones which are used more frequently. And that is where a lot of people start assuming that APIs are only about REST and SOAP, which is not correct. Even some people who have studied about Java, they will there, if you will see the definitions of APIs, it will say APIs is a pack. APIs are nothing but collection of packages and a lot of sub packages. And within those packages and sub packages, we will have your interfaces and classes, even whatever drivers we have, right, to establish a connectivity with the database, those are called kind of APIs only, which will help you to talk to the target system, right? So for example, you have used certain drivers, right? You must be using certain drivers to talk to the, let's say, from Java application, you can talk to the database, right? Do you need to care what is the underlying complexity? No, right? Even in Boomi, if you have attended my sessions when we were connecting with MySQL or any other database, we just installed the driver. Do we know that how are there things happening internally? No, right? But there is some code which is written within the driver, right? So the driver is like an API which will help us to establish the connectivity with that underlying application, that is underlying database. So APIs are not only about REST and so, but yes, definitely when we are talking about the APIs over the web, over a network, then REST and SOAP are the ones which are used more frequently. But then it is not only about that, and also different people have different perspectives about API. Okay, some people say some people say web services are nothing but APIs. Okay, there, even if you read on the net, there will be a lot of confusion around it. That a lot of people would say that web services are nothing but APIs. Okay, or else in other words, I can say they will say web services are subset of APIs. So API is a bigger umbrella where we can have Java based APIs, where we have .NET APIs, where we have web based APIs, and within web based APIs we have REST and SOAP, right? API is a bigger umbrella. API is any kind of interface that will help you to talk to a different application without letting know the underlying complexity, as simple as that. Now that may be a Java based API, that may be some Linux API, that may be a web based API, and within web based API we have SOAP and REST, right? Or else they say web services is kind of a subset of API. There are other set of people who say API is not about implementation. API is just about interface, about defining those standards, about defining about the rules and regulations that will help the underlying or different applications to talk to each other. But the implementation of the logic is not part of the API. Okay, so we'll talk about it. Just want to give a little bit flavor of it right at this moment. When we talk about the rest and all, we'll talk in more detail and we will try to understand both the perspectives. So I would not say that this is right or that is right. It is all about the perception, right? Those people who come from a strong SOA background, they will always see APIs as more as uh, web services, whereas other set of people who are coming from the rest world, who are new to this, they think a distinction. For them the APIs is only about that interface part, and that implementation, what happens behind the scene, is not an is not kind of an API for them. They say application programming interface. Okay, interface is not an implementation. Interface and implementation are two different things, right? So for them, interface is just that boundary layer which will help to talk, right? What is there under the hood is not a part of API. So for example, there is a socket. Behind the socket, there must be n number of things which must be happening, right? That is reading the data from your pen drive and you can access the data within your laptop, right? But that implementation which is happening inside is not an API. It is not an interface. Interface is just boundary and those rules and regulations which are helping those two different parties to communicate. Once communication happens, the data can reach to that boundary. After that, whatever logic building you do, that falls into implementation. Whereas people who think APIs are web services, for them the complete business functionality, everything is an API. Okay, so we will try to bifurcate that API into, like, interface and the development. So there are people who think only the interface part can be considered as an API, whereas there are rest of the people who think API part, interface part plus the implementation, both are APIs. So it is actually both are true. If it is all, it always depends from what perspective you're looking at. Okay, if you're looking from consumer perspective, then you might think that API is just about that interface. Okay, because you don't need to care what is the underlying logic written. Yes, but if you are a service provider, if you're an API developer, then for you only interface will not make sense. You will always have to define a logic also. What I'm trying to say is, let's say you are a Boomi integration guy, right? And you need to do an integration with Salesforce, and you need to basically call their API. So what do you need to know from them if you want to call their API? Let's say you want to call their SOAP API. Then what do you need to know from them? What do you need to know? Specification.
Specification.
Very nice. And specifications are, how are the specifications defined for SOAP?
Wisdom.
Wisdom.
Very nice. So what actually would you demand from them?
Wisdom.
Wisdom or
This
wisdom URL. Wisdom file or wisdom URL.
very nice. So do you need to know that what is the underlying implementation?
No.
No, right?
No.
So now since you are acting as a consumer, so from your perspective, you can say API is only about interface where I need to know the specifications, and that's what API is. That so the beauty of the API is we don't need to worry about the underlying implementation. We just need to know the rules and regulations, the protocol which needs to be kept in mind while calling the service, and our job is done. Fantastic. Now you are an API developer. You need to expose an API to the end system. Now, from your perspective, only specifications will help, or you will need to write some implementation also. Let's say you have to develop an API which can help to pull the data of an order on the basis of an order ID. Okay, you have to develop an API which will help an end user to pull the data of an order on the basis of an order ID. So in this case, will the specifications alone be sufficient to define the API, or you need to do some kind of implementation also?
We need to do some kind of implementation as well.
So the point I'm trying to say is there are two different perspectives, right? You have two different personas. What are the two different personas? API consumer and API provider. If you're an API consumer, API is all about interface. What is the meaning of interface? Which means it's more about specifications, right? When I say specifications, it will definitely include a lot of things, right? But when you're an API provider, it's not only about specification, it's not only about interface, but also implementation, right? So when you're developing the web services, are you only developing interface or the implementation also? Because what we told, what is a web service? I told web service is a software function. So when you write a function, do you only write the interface or you write the implementation also?
Implementation also.
All you write the implementation also, right? So when people say web, so a lot of people who say web services are like APIs, maybe their way of looking at things is from the API provider perspective, right? They are just thinking of themselves as an API provider, and in a way it is right, that API will not make sense unless I have an implementation, right? But when I'm standing at a role or at a persona where I'm acting as an API consumer, do I need to care about implementation? So people, so let's say I'm doing an integration with Facebook. Okay, I have to use their API. Do I need to care about their implementation? Do I need to bother about that?
No.
All I need to care about is the specifications. Once I know the specifications, I can go and just start consuming their APIs, right? So my point is that you should know both the perspectives. And when you give this kind of you know this kind of thought process, let's say somebody, sometimes an interviewer also tries to confuse you, and so if you give this kind of perception to them, right, then they will definitely believe that you're more mature and you understand that things looks like differently from two different sides of the coin. So you have to understand both the perspectives, and both of the perspectives are correct to an extent depending on the role we are playing, right? Even in when we are in working on Boomi, so sometimes we will act as an API consumer, and there will be times when we will act as an API provider. Okay. So when you are acting as an API provider, who will consume your API? Some third party, right? Yes. When you're acting as an API provider, third parties. will consume the API, and we are acting as an API consumer. Third parties will expose the API, isn't it? When you are the API provider, who will expose the API? When you are API provider, who will expose the API?
Parties.
We only.
We will expose the API, na? API owner will expose the API, isn't it? Who will maintain the APIs? If you are the API provider, who will maintain the APIs?
Service.
API owner.
API owner or API provider will own the APIs or maintain the APIs, right? When you are the API consumer, who will maintain the APIs?
API provider.
Third party provider, right? All right. So we will continue talking about it. Okay. So now we are first starting with a scenario where third party is exposing an API and we want to consume it, right? So when we are consuming it, are we acting as a client or are we acting as a server? Server is someone who is going to process the request. Client is someone who is going to create a request, right? You go to a Domino's pizza store. So you are a client or you are a server?
Client.
You're a client, right? You go to a bank to deposit certain money. You're a client or you're a server?
Client.
Client, right? Because you are initiating some request and maybe bank is going to process it, isn't it? So now when you're a client and you have to basically pass a request, so you have to follow certain protocol, right? Isn't it? You have to follow certain format. So when you go to bank to deposit the money, right? Can you go and just hand over the money as is, or you have to follow certain protocol? Do you have to fill certain form where you have to mention the recipient account details, recipient names, your details, the phone number, the amount, denomination, that how many notes of 100 rupees. I'm talking in INR, haven't earned any time in USD, so still talking about INR. Uh, how many, what are the denominations of 100 rupees notes, 10 rupees notes? You will enter all those details and you will hand over that. That I don't know what is that form called as, but then you will hand over it to them and they will process your request, right? So there is some protocol you need to follow, even if you're doing an online banking, right? And you're trying to, let's say, do an instant payment to certain person, you will have to fill in certain details, right? You have to select the account details of that person, you'll have to select the amount, isn't it? So as an API consumer, you always need some sort of guidelines which you need to follow, right? And who will publish those guidelines? Who will publish those guidelines?
API provider.
API provider, right? Isn't it? If you go to a theater to watch a movie, right? So who will publish the guidelines, whether you can carry tables or not, right? Whether you can have children along with you or not, right? Whether you can smoke in the premises or not, whether you have to come to the, theater maybe 15 minutes prior to the movie starts, or maybe you're not allowed into the theater once it has been 15 minutes, you're more than 15 minutes late. So these are kind of rules which API provider or the service provider will define, and consumer always needs to adhere to it, right? So whenever we are consumer for something, right, we always need to get that guidelines, right? You book a ticket on let's say Make My Trip or any online portal for that matter, right? So you get certain guidelines, right, that you are requested to reach to the airports maybe for maybe 90 minutes before the, your departure time and all that stuff. So now when we talk about the API world, we need to get those guidelines, and those guidelines are typically published in the form of specifications. And when we are talking about SOAP, those specifications are published in the form of WSDL file. So anytime you are consuming a SOAP service, you should have no hesitation in demanding a WSDL file from the service provider. And if they're telling that, boss, I don't have a WSDL file, then you always need to raise a flag with the stakeholders. Boss, unless I get the proper specifications, I can't go and write the logic to consume that service or to consume that API, right? Right? API and service, the only difference is API is like restricting ourselves to interface. Sir, when we say service, it is more about the business functionality along with interface. Okay, that is the only distinction, right? A lot of people, if you say API and web service interchangeably, they will get offended that these are two different things. There are some people who think that these are exactly same, but then only difference what can people think of is application programming interface. There they would think that interfacing is not about the business functionality. Okay, so depending on the kind of audience you are with, depending on the kind of the perception they carry, you can kind of mold yourself. But for me, from my perspective, there is no much big difference. Yes, there is a difference in the way we are working with the APIs these days. When we talk about the API management, yes, there is a difference business, because we are not only focusing on the functionality, rather functionality, developing the functionality is only one part of the overall life cycle of the API. There are a lot of other aspects to it, which is right. But as far as the implementation is concerned, I don't think much has changed. The way we used to do maybe 5 6 years back and whatever we are doing now, there is no much difference. So now if I want to consume some soap service, so what we'll do is we'll start with let's say calculator soap service. So if you remember, we saw some soap services which are available on over the web. So do we have some visual file? Yes. Now
Yes.
let's say this visual file is exposed by some third party and they have given us a visual URL, okay, which is like this. Now the first and the foremost thing which you should do, right, without even before you start writing your logic in Boomi and all, you should test this API or the web service, soap based web service, from a
SOAP API.
soap UI. Yeah, you should use some kind of a testing tool, which I mentioned about maybe in earlier sessions also. So I mentioned for soap, I will recommend you to use what? Soap UI. And for rest, what did I recommend?
Postman.
Postman. You can use anything else also, right? There are a lot of stuff in the market these days. It's up to you. I personally go with this flavors, but you have some uh, other preferences, then stick to that. That's fine. So now before I would write this logic, I will just try to understand how does it work from the SOAP UI perspective. So what I'll do is I'll go to SOAP UI. I'll go to SOAP and here I will give them my visual URL, KLC, and I'll say okay. All right. So, okay. So here, do you see some requests? SOAP envelope, SOAP header, body, all that stuff, right? Why do you see this namespace http temp UI ra.org? Why do you see this?
Yeah, that is a namespace.
Because
Ne-
we are referring that namespace.
Target
We are referring the namespace.
Where does this namespace come from?
URL. I mean, the namespace is tem and VM.
Why the namespace value is this only, not something else? Where, I mean, who should have
Provider,
defined it?
the service provider.
A service provider might have defined the same namespace, and that's why we are adhering to that. But where would have been this namespace defined by the service provider? In the XSD file, in the visual file, where exactly?
In the wisdom file.
wisdom file.
Okay, so now you have to understand that where are you using this namespace, right? You're using here,
Yes.
add A, B, and all that stuff, these elements. So where are these elements defined?
Visual.
Schema.
In the schema. Very nice. So if you see, I mean, everything is eventually there in the visual, which is also correct. But if I go here, do you see here you're defining add int name of the element a b, isn't it? And here what was the target namespace? http tempuri.org. That's why you see the same namespace over here, right? Isn't it? Now tell me one thing. Is it possible to remove this prefix? Can I make it something like this?
No.
If I don't want any prefix, is it somehow possible to make my request run with this?
No.
Anyone who feels it is possible?
No.
Otherwise,
Answer is it is possible. It is possible, and for this request to work, you have to make this as a default namespace. What did I say about default namespace? How many default namespaces can we have at an element level? Only one, right?
Only one.
Right now, do we have any default namespaces? We didn't had any, right? How can you identify whether any namespace is a default namespace or not?
Namespace which does not have prefix or default namespace.
Very nice. Any namespace which does not have a prefix is a default namespace. So all were prefix. So I converted this into a default namespace. And where all does default namespace become applicable? For all such elements which are not prefixed. Now rest of the elements are prefixed or not?
yes.
Only these elements are not prefixed. So what will it conclude? That these elements are associated with which namespace? This
Default
namespace, right? And that's what we wanted, right?
Yeah.
Isn't it? Now, can I have something like this? Is it correct?
There should be only one important.
We should have only one default namespace at an element level. We cannot have two. But now let me ask you this. Can I have an arrangement wherein I don't want to use a prefix at all for this? So first of all, at an element level, I cannot have two default namespaces, right? So ideally only one is allowed. So since I already made one a default namespace, so this should be prefix one, isn't it? Isn't it? So
Yes.
first let's try to run it. Let's say I give 10, 20. I run the request. You get 30. You get 30, right? Absolutely fine. Fantastic. This is working fine. Now, next question is, so now when it was working, do you know how that calculation is happening internally? Whether the code is written in Java, .NET, PHP,
We don't know.
we don't know, right? So is it abstracting that complexity from you or not? Yes. So you are, as a consumer, you don't need to care about the implementation, right? You are just you are interfacing. Interfacing means just pushing your request in a legitimate format and you are getting the job done. Yes. Okay. Now little bit we'll tweak about the namespaces. We'll play around with the namespaces. Let's say we want both of these without prefix. Okay. So if I don't want prefix, so what should I do is, let me see if it will work. I don't know why it's not working. Anyhow, what I'm trying to say is, I don't want all these prefixes, but still I want this request to run. Is there a way? Something like this. So then in that case, I told we cannot have more than one default namespace at an element level, isn't it?
Yes.
So this XMLNS is equal to some value is not fine at two places. Okay. So now what we'll do is, yeah, you're saying something, Prithvi?
Yeah, you can remove that and add to the, yeah, here. So then,
So now let's try it out. Is it still working?
yes.
If you're confused, let's change the values. Is it working? Yes or no?
Yes.
Yes, it is okay.
Yes. So see, you may not need to try this, but if you understand it correct, then only you can play around like this. If you don't understand what is the meaning of namespace, default namespace, you will always try to be in dilemma. So now what happened is this namespace became applicable to envelope and all the child elements. But one of the child element add has its own default namespace. So the priority will be given to this one, right? So add and all its childs will get associated with which namespace? This one, right? Isn't it?
Yes.
So this service is working fine, isn't it? This service which we have on the right, I mean, which we have tried to consume, is it working fine? Is it returning some addition of two numbers? So similarly, we have subtraction also. So how many operations this service is exposing?
The operation.
Very nice. Two operations. What is the nature of those two operations? Synchronous, asynchronous, one way.
Synchronous.
Synchronous.
Why is it synchronous?
It has both input and output.
Yeah.
Very nice. Because we are passing a request,
And we are getting the response.
we are getting an immediate response. So that's why it is a synchronous. So now we know this. This is endpoint or this is WSDL URL, the one which you see on the top. So this is endpoint, and the one which is there here, this is called as WSDL URL, isn't it? And this is called as endpoint. What is the meaning of endpoint?
Location of the service.
Very nice. The location of the service. So this is where your request is getting hit, right? Now, another thing you should also observe when you're working on the scope UI is the raw request. This is also very important if you want to understand a little bit in depth. Which, so here you see what is written post, and which is the protocol that is being used?
HTTP.
HTTP, which method? Post method. So HTTP has got different methods. Okay, if you're, I don't know whether you're aware or not, but HTTP is a transport protocol which supports different types of verbs, or we also call those as methods or verbs. Get verb, post verb, put verb, patch verb, delete verb. Likewise, we have many. Okay, options verb. There are so many, but the ones which are used more frequently are get, post, put, patch, delete. Okay, and as per the REST standards, there are scenarios where we should use get, where we should use post, patch, delete. But in SOAP, which one is always used? Post. Okay, in SOAP, which one is always used? Post.
Post.
Here you see there are some headers which are going except encoding, content type, and here is your request, right? Isn't it? All right. So now here one important thing which you have to observe is action. One important thing you have to observe is action. So where is this action typically defined is, if you will see that WSDL file, within the WSDL file, there is a section which helps in defining the protocol and the data format, which is that section called as?
Binding.
Very nice. Binding is a section which is helpful to define the protocol and data format. And within binding, if you remember, you will refer the port types. And within port type, what do we have? What is defined within port type?
Operations.
Very nice. You define operations, right? So now when you're trying to bind to a service, so have you written here which operation do you want to bind to? In this endpoint, have you mentioned anywhere?
No.
So there are multiple operations exposed by this service. But now which operation do you want to trigger, right? You go to ATM, there is a single ATM with that which you can do multiple things, but somewhere you have to specify, right? Whether you want to withdraw the amount or you want to check your balance or you want to transfer the funds, right? So this action is that place where you define. What are you telling? What you want to do? So you have given some action name. And if you go to the WSDL file, let's quickly look for here. Can you see SOAP action here? Is there action? Yes. What you told for this operation, what is the action name? This.
Subtract.
For if you want to trigger subtract operation, what is the SOAP action you need to pass? you need to pass this. And that's how at the runtime, it is decided that which operation will get triggered. Are you understanding this?
Yes, Sumit.
This is very, very important to understand because I'll tell you why it is so. So I hope we understand this. So we made observation of all these things. Fine, nice. So now we want to do same thing in Boomi, right? So what we'll do is we'll go here, we'll log into Boomi. Okay, so we are logged in over here. Now we'll go to the integration. So here is a folder for, so here within this, I'll create a new folder, API. Okay, and within that, we will create a new folder, SOAP. And within that, I'll create a process. I'll name this as consume SOAP services. Yes. So which is the shape that would be always there?
Start shape.
Star shape, right? So what we'll do is for now, we'll start with a star shape of no data type. All right, let's do that. Now, what do you want to do? We want to consume the SOAP service, right? So for consuming the SOAP here, what we'll do? Web services, SOAP client. What we will do? Web services, SOAP client, right? So now when we go here, we'll go to the configuration. There are two options, connection and operation. I think these all things you're aware. So if you're understanding here, what is the name of the connector? Web services SOAP client. So that means when we are trying to consume anything, we are acting as a client, isn't it? Yes. Now you go to the action. Sorry, connection. So I'm saying SOAP for now. So here, what is it asking for? WSDL URL,
Still URL.
SOAP endpoint URL, right? Do we have the WSDL URL?
Yes.
Okay. Do we have the SOAP endpoint URL? Is there any kind of authentication right now on this service? No, right?
No.
So we'll just save and we'll just save and close. And now we'll get into the operation. We'll get into the operation. So what do you want? So at a time, can we trigger both addition and subtraction? When we were testing from the SOAP UI, could we trigger both
No, only
addition and
only
At a time,
one.
only one operation.
at a time we can trigger only one, right? So I will say addition. So always see, understand that whatever you are doing in the SOAP UI, same thing you're doing in Boomi. Okay, you are not doing anything different. You're doing same thing, exactly same thing right now. So now here there are some options: tracking directions, select the document directory traction, either input document or output document. This setting affects which document appears in the process reporting. So now in the process reporting, typically you will not see both input connector or output. You will see either of those. Whether you will see the input document or the output document, that you can select from here, that which one do you want to see. Then there is another setting, request application error responses. What does that mean is if something errors outright, do you want that connector to fail and error out, or else you want that error to be returned so that your flow will move forward and the connector will not fail. So if you'll check this flag and if something errors out, your connector, you will not see that red color bold mark on the connector saying that this failed. Rather, you will see some response, but that response will be what kind of response? It will be an error response. Now here there are a couple of options: expose request envelope, expose response envelope. Which envelope are they talking about?
SOAP envelope.
Very nice. They are talking about the SOAP envelope because you are working with a SOAP service and SOAP will have envelope. So what does they mean? What do they mean by is, can we have a SOAP service called without a SOAP envelope? We can never have that. SOAP envelope will be always there, but when you want to look at things in Boomi, do you want to see that envelope or not? If you want, don't, if you're not interested in looking at it, you can keep it like, I don't want to expose in the request and response, which is fine. And I will save it. And here there is a button called as attachment, or sorry, import. There is a button called as import. So here I can, so it is there on internet, right? So I can use Atom from my local Atom, which is over here, or my cloud Atom also. And here I will choose connection. Again, there is an option, do you want to expose or not? I don't want to expose, and I'll hit next.
Yeah, we got object type.
Object type is nothing but operation here. How many operations do you see?
2 operations, add and subtract.
Operation.
Add and subtract, and that's what you could see in the SOAP also.
Yes, subtract.
Let's, so what, it's up to you, whatever you want to select. Okay, let's select subtract. So now it is connecting to the Atom, and Atom will connect to the service, and it is reading all that metadata in the visual file. And what is it creating? It is creating request and response profiles. Which, what would be the format of the profiles? XML, JSON, database, flat file?
XML.
XML. Because SOAP always works on
XML.
XML. So save, and now here you go to the request. What do you see? Subtract. Do you see SOAP envelope? Do you see SOAP body?
No.
No, right?
No.
Why don't you see those things? Because while creating the profile, you had selected an option called as, so I'll go back, right? Let's click on import. So there is a checkbox, right? Expose request envelope, expose response. If you remember it, last time, did we select that or we unchecked it? We unchecked this, right? Now this time I will check for one, for request I will check, and for response I'll keep it unchecked. I will do this again. So it is asking, do you want to import the same object or the new object? I want to restrict myself to the same object. All right, this again got refactored. I will save everything and will come to the request profile. Do you see envelope, header, body, and now subtract? Isn't it? So eventually when the request will go to the service, it will always go with the same SOAP envelope and all that stuff. But now if you just don't want to see those envelope and related elements, you can uncheck that flag which says expose SOAP envelope and all that stuff, right? We'll say save and close. We'll say save and close. Okay. So now your client is configured. Your client is configured. It will internally automatically create all that request and all which is required to be triggered while calling the service. And here I'll add a stop ship. So now do we need to pass certain parameters in the request? Do we need certain parameters?
Yes.
We need to pass some value to A and B, right? Yes or no? So
Yes,
now here there is a section called as parameters. So there are multiple ways to pass it. One of the ways is you can go to the parameters, you can select A, And let's say I'm giving a static value as 100. And then here you can go and select B, and you can, let's say, select 200. I'll just try to fire it. So there is a start shape. Right after that, we have got a web services SOAP client. Everything works smooth. You come to the stop shape, and in the stop shape, we see a document. If we go to this client, we go to the connection data. Here also we see some document, right? So this is a request or response.
Request.
Is the request.
And why we are seeing request and not the response over here? Because in the client, if you remember, there was an option, right, where it asked you that which document do you want to capture as a part of the connection. I will show you that again. But if you go to the stop shape, and if you see this document, you see some response. Is it correct?
Yeah.
Minus 100.
Yes.
Yes. So that means you're able to consume the service. But do you see an envelope and all that stuff?
No.
No. So does that mean that that envelope was never passed from the SOAP service?
No, we didn't check that box. Export.
Yeah, that came in from that service to Boomi, but Boomi kind of removed that. Why it removed it? Because that's how you configured your operation, right? Yes or no? Yes. So here tracking direction, let's say I say output documents. Save and close. Go to the connection. Select this connection data. Do you see some document? Now, do you see some response document? Earlier, here you were seeing the request, right? And now you are seeing response. Based on which settings?
Input or output.
Yes. So it was pretty simple, right? So now a lot of people say that why have you been wasting time from last 3 sessions when consuming the service was so easy? Okay. I mean, it's all up to you. If you want to know it, it's good. Otherwise, it's really easy, right? Now let me ask you one thing. This SOAP right now, whatever service we are consuming, is internally using which protocol, which transport protocol?
HTTP.
HTTP. And which method of HTTP?
Post.
Very nice. HTTP post. Now, do we have any client which will work for HTTP? Here there is one client, right? Now, question is, can I call the SOAP services using HTTP client? See, now what happens in Boomi, one thing which is very, very peculiar about Boomi is that how will Boomi charge you for their services? What is the primary factor that impacts the licensing cost in Boomi world?
Number of connections. Connections we use.
Very nice. Number of connections you consume, right? So now let's say you have to talk to some third party, right? Now, what you are doing over here is they might expose hundreds of services, right? Isn't it? They might expose hundreds of services. You might need to consume them, but will every service have the same visual URL?
No.
No, right? What I'm saying is, let's say there are hundreds of services, each service having hundreds of operations, right? Then, and you have to consume, let's say, all those hundreds of services. How many connection licenses you will need?
100. 100.
100, right? Because here what are you configuring? The visual URL, and the visual URL might be different, right? For all those 100 services. So one way is that your target system will write a wrapper service, and that wrapper service kind of internally routes to those hundreds of services. But that wrapper service should support how many operations? 100 into 100, isn't it? Or else it should have some kind of mechanism, some kind of identifier that will help in routing the request to the right service. But target system may not be ready for that. Okay, like target system, if it is some third party application, they may not be ready to do that because of the fact that you are using Boomi, right? Whether you use Boomi, MuleSoft, or you use point to point integration, doesn't matter for them, right? They told that we have APIs exposed, you go and consume it, right? It is none of our business whether you use 100 connections, one connection, right? They will not make those changes. Now that becomes really challenging, right? Like will any enterprise will they be ever ready to purchase 100 connection licenses? No, right? They would not do that. So then the point is, in the industry, to consume the soap services, we also use HTTP client connector. Okay, HTTP client connector, when it is used to consume soap services, it gives us certain flexibilities. I will show you how. But before that, what I want to do is I want to once again go here. This connection is fine. We'll go here. Here I will say input documents, save and close, save. I'll just run it one more time. And the reason why I'm running it is I want to capture my request data somewhere. So can I see my request data? This is my request data. Is it the right request data? No, I mean, when I say request data, if you see the formatted view, the Boomi does not show you namespaces, right? But if you come here, does it show you the namespaces? Yes or no?
Yes, it is showing.
Yes.
So you should always copy from here and not from here. This is your actual data. I'll copy it and I'll make a note of it like this. All right. So now I will go for HTTP client. Can I go for HTTP client? Because eventually what kind of call I'm making? HTTP call or not?
Yes.
Yes. Okay, but there, so now when I go to the HTTP client, so now what happens, what is the advantage with the HTTP client? Let's go here. So the name is HTTP client. There is nothing like a REST client. Okay, there is HTTP client. There are options like get or send. So I will say send, because when I say post is like comes under send. Send means you will be able to pass some data. And here there is an option called as connection. Okay, I'm just writing HTTP is the connection name. And here it is asking me the URL name. URL. So now you tell me one thing, if I go here and if I give this complete URL like this, again, I will land up in the same problem, isn't it? Because if I will have 100 services, 100 services will have different endpoints, isn't it? What I'm saying is there are 100 services running on one server, but each service will have a different endpoint or not?
Yes.
Yes. Now the reason why I'm trying to use HTTP client is because I do not want to use 100 different connections to access 100 different services which are running on the same server. But when you use HTTP client, what you can do is here you can give this URL, which is also called as base URL. So for all those servers, okay, maybe I don't know what all I removed. Let me get back. So if you see, this is like your host, right? After generally, what is the convention of any URL, right? You will have a protocol first, which is HTTPS over here, and then you will have your host name, right? This ecs.sir.edu, is it your host name or not? I mean, it is kind of a DNS name, but behind the scene, it will get linked to some machine, right? And the request will get routed to some machine. So this is kind of your host name. And whatever there is past that, that might change for different services. But your host name will be same or not? If
Yes.
100 services are running on the same machine, your host name is going to be same.
Yes.
Yes. So think of it like this, there are 100 families living in an apartment, right? Apartment name will remain same, right? Your flat numbers might change, isn't it? So that's those 100 flats in a single apartment. You can think of it like, your 100 services running on one server. So now first we will give we will here in the connection part, we will give only the part which will remain common. which is also called as base URI, right? Base URI. Base URI is something which is kind of common for all the different services or the resources, right? You have let's say 500 flats or 100 flats. The society name or the apartment name remains common, right? What might change? Your flat numbers might change, isn't it?
Yes.
So yes. So first in the connection details, I'm giving this part because connection is something which we want to reuse. Why we want to reuse? Because we are charged for connection licenses. Now I'll go to the operation. In the operation, it is asking for some request profile. I will say XML. In the response, what we will get? XML. Content type, application/XML. HTTP method, which one we should choose? Post. So there is like return HTTP errors, return HTTP response. This all is there. Return HTTP, you must check this one. If you will not check this one, it will not return the responses. We want to see the responses, right? And here, the moment you selected the request and the response profile, does it give you an option to create the profile? Yes or no? But now the profile will not get automatically generated the way it happened in the SOAP client connector, because SOAP client connector has the additional capability of parsing the visual and generating a profile for you. But can it happen over here? No, that's fine. But did we already create a profile? Do we already have some profiles?
Yes, we have.
Can we use those profiles?
Yes.
Profiles are components, can be reused.
Yes.
Yes. Even if you do not give the profiles, it will work. Okay. So REST does not check it. Ideally, you should not do that. You should always mention the profiles, but even if you will not give the profiles, it will work. Okay. So now there is another section, request header, resource path. Okay. So internally, you might have read some statement. I don't know if you did some research on REST versus SOAP. People will write like a SOAP can be always implemented as a part of REST, but other way around is not true, because REST is an architecture whereas SOAP is a protocol. So now here what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to use kind of HTTP client, which you can say is kind of REST client. And here I'm trying to consume the SOAP service the way I consume the REST services, right? So what I did is in the connection part, did we configure the complete endpoint? Did we configure this complete endpoint? No, right? We just configured the path before this.
Base URI.
Yes, base URI. And now what I'll do is there is a option called as resource path. I'll go here and rest of the part I will add over here. Just one thing, you should not keep the / initially, because in this resource path, Boomi automatically adds one /. So if you will also add one /. How many / it will become? 2. I have faced this problem many times myself. Please take care of this. You do not do this blunder. Okay, this all is fine. We have configured this. Now it will go to the endpoint. Now, how will it know that whether to trigger addition or subtraction? You are sending some data, that is fine. Okay, then but how will it know that whether to trigger addition or subtraction?
SOAP action.
SOAP action. If you go here in the SOAP UI, there was something called as action we were passing, which is also called as definitely what action? SOAP action, isn't it? Here they have given the name as action, but yeah, maybe it considers both action or SOAP action. So what happens is now different. So there are, even for visuals, there are different styles of writing the visual. Okay, I did not touch that because again, then we can talk 20 hours only about visual only. Okay, even for writing visuals, there are different styles. If you want to explore, you can do that. There are 5 styles: RPC literal, RPC encoded, document literal, document encoded, and there is something called as document wrapped. These are the ones which are used more frequently. Okay, but some legacy applications might be using RPC also. RPC stands for remote procedure call, and literal or encoded defines your serialization or deserialization techniques. Okay, I'll not touch this. You can explore about it if you want. Otherwise, this is not so important. Good to know, but not mandatory to know. So what I'm trying to say is, based on the style of your whistle, it is decided whether passing action is mandatory or not. Okay, sometimes even if you do not pass action and it works, and the reason why it might be happening is because your whistle might be defined in one such style which does not need action mandatorily. Okay, so it depends on the style of the whistle. But now if you go to your whistle, did they explicitly define the soap action? So whenever it is explicitly defined here, soap action, it will not be always the case that your whistle will always have this soap action. But for this binding, do you see a soap action? Yes. What is the style? Document style, right? Document style. So what we will do is this soap action, ideally, where should we pass? We should go here and we should pass that in headers. We should pass in the header. What is the value? So now when you are using soap client connector, did you need to do all that stuff? It
No.
was implicitly taken care, but now you're trying to use your HTTP client connector as more like soap connector. And why you are doing so? Because you do not want to exhaust too many connection licenses. So now what happens is, whatever is the base URI and whatever you give in the resource path, both will get concatenated, and that is the actual endpoint which is triggered. Here you are passing the headers, and here you gave the provision that my request will be of which type? XML type. My response will be of which type? XML type, and your method is post. So if you see your raw requests over here, are these only the important things?
Yes.
And then next thing is body. Okay, now this body, this profile will not get automatically created, which we understand. Now if I want to pass that body as is, just to check whether this HTTP client will work, will be able to consume the SOAP service or not, if I just want to pass that complete body, which shape from Boomi can be used to pass some static data?
Message shape.
Very nice. So that is the reason why I kept the sample request. I have the sample request, a working sample request. Now what I will do is, I will add a message shape. And in the message shape, we'll go here and we'll run the test. Okay, so nothing got errored out. We'll come to the stop shape. We see some document being returned. It says what is it saying? The server cannot service the request because the media type is unsupported. Okay, that's fine. That's fine. Media type means what? Kind of your content type. Yes. So now here we will use which shape? Set property shape. In the set property shape, if you go to the property, there is a property, MIME property. Yes or no? There is something called as content type. Yes. And this one I will write. So one which we configured in the connector, right? In the operation part, actually that is for operation. That is for operation. Let me try to define it over here like this. So your service is checking for some specific MIME type, that your data has to be of this type. So that information is passed over here. If you see over here, the content type is going or not. What is it going as? Application slash so plus XML. Okay. So it typically works with application slash XML also. If it will not work, we will pass it as it is. So we'll go back, we'll come here. Again, I think we have the same error. Okay, again, we have the same error. So what we will do is we'll go to the set properties, MIME type, content type. All right. I think this is fine. And here the static value, I will change it to this one. Okay, just one thing I want to check over the internet is, do we have that semi? Yes. Okay, that's fine. So we'll go back to Boomi. All right, but even for the first two requests, you didn't see the error, but you see the flow is going forward. Why it is happening so? Though we never got the response, actually the request didn't get processed the way we expected, but we are not getting the error. Why is it happening so? Because in the operation we had selected return HTTP errors. When we say return HTTP errors, or when we say return application responses, in that case, it will not error out, but it will return the error message. So we'll go to the stop shape source data. Oh my God, it's still failing. The server cannot service the request because the media type is unsupported. Just give me a minute. It might work with test. Now there is no document. It didn't fail. Hold on. Return HTTP responses, return HTTP errors. Soap action. This is fine. So the call is going through, but we are not seeing the exact response. Let me check. Is there something wrong? Hold on. XML, this is fine. Soap action is fine. Okay, I think there is some issue with the MIME type. Let me see. This is how we typically set it. Let's check it once. Oh my God, again and again, we are getting the same issue. The call is going to the API. The server cannot service the request because the media type is unsupported. All right. Let me try with this again. Okay, actually this will work. It depends on, maybe we need to typically check with the service provider, but I think this should exactly match. And if it matches, ideally it should work. Okay, no worries. So what we will do is, instead of passing it over here, this is one way. Let's not try this one. That's fine. So we'll go to this operation, and here in the header, I will just pass exactly same thing. Okay. Content type. Okay, this is going as a header, right? So I will also try to mimic the same behavior. So if you also face similar issue, you can try this application. Let's try it now. So what I've done is I've added an header in the request. So there was one header which is kind of SOAP action, right? Where we are trying to specify which operation we need to trigger, and I added a header also. Now, do you see some response coming back? Okay, so now there is so the service got triggered, but we got an error, right? So it is saying server was not able to expect process the request, is an unexpected token, blah blah blah. Okay, let me do one thing. Let me go back to this. Let me change back this to application/xml. So this, whatever content type you give over here, this is typically for your response. Okay, now let's see what is the error. Okay, server was unable to process request. The expected token is, what is this? 1.0 is an unexpected token. What is this? Let me try this way. So you'll have to tweak few things. Sometimes there are some legacy services. Even in real time, you might get these kind of errors. Okay. So let's see. I think we'll be able to fix it. Should not be a problem. We have moved ahead than what we were getting earlier. Now we are again getting some error. Again, back the service cannot process a request because media type is not supported. I think this one wasn't an issue. Hold on. Oh, okay. We'll go back to the SOAP UI once. So here we have the SOAP envelope and all that stuff. We'll compare the request, whatever we have in the message shape. I think the request is absolutely fine. Don't see an issue with the request. Anybody can think of anything. Action is fine. Characters. Okay, we'll try to pass this also. So I don't think these should be required, but then these are the headers which are going right. So we'll try to make sure that our request looks same. So some of things may not be mandatory always to pass. It typically works. Or else maybe hold on, handouts. Sometimes if you, even if you're not giving the right service, right? So what I'll do is I'll try one more thing. Sometimes there might be a problem with our base URI also. Okay, so we have to select the base URI right. Otherwise, that I have seen issues in that case also. So we'll try to give this faculty, because eventually there has to be a HTTP server, right? Which will listen to that request, and that HTTP server will have some base URI. That what, and after that there will be a relative URI, right? So sometimes only giving host name will not work, because depending on the fact that at which path you have your HTTP server listening. So you'll have to see that it might be an issue with the HTTP server also. Let me try this. It doesn't actually error out. I don't know what is going wrong with this. Something with the content type. It is application slash soap XML. We'll try with. Hold on, give me few minutes. I'll just try a different permutation and combination. All right. Let me remove the soap action once. All right, now let's see. It's working, right? So finally it is working, right? Do you see the response coming back?
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah. Yes. So we'll go back here. So I added a content type text slash HTML. I didn't give that soap action, but still it worked, right? Still it was able to return that response, isn't it?
Yes.
And the reason why it happens so is because if you see your request, where is your request? Here is your request, right? So as I was telling you, right, depending on the type of visual you have defined, or what is the, not only visual, I mean the binding style. Basically binding style is what matters. So in this binding style, if you will see what is it does it, if it finds, if like you pass some soup action or you did not pass some soup action, so in that case what does it try to do is it will try to match the name of the element. Okay, if even actually this is deliberately done in the kind of style which have been used for defining even the visual. If you will see, your the name of the operation and the name of the root element will be matching. So if you see, the name of the root element and the name of the operation is matching, and that's how also it decides that this is the operation which is required to be triggered. But ideally, it's a good practice that you pass a action, right? Because in the visual, they have written that for this operation, this is the action. If the action is not passed, and if it does not find any of the matching operations for that, then in that case, it tries to match with the root element name, because there are visual definition styles wherein this kind of binding is done or this matching is done such that your even the way we define the visual is the name of your operation and the name of your element are matching, and then you don't pass a soap action, still it will be able to trigger the corresponding one. And here what I did is the content type I changed to text/xml. Okay, so there are certain legacy services which take text/xml instead of application/xml. There is a slight, I don't remember the exact difference, but there is a slight difference. The way the prologue is conceived in text/xml and application/xml. But the point is, see, we are able to consume it, but I will recommend you to add a SOAP action. Okay, so you do not rely on that matching, and there is no hard and fast rule that always your operation name and the complex element name has to be same. So when you go for the document wrapped style says that you may not have your root element name and the operation name matching. Whereas in document, I think document literal style, maybe that has to be matching. So, but then in the industry, generally we prefer to go over document wrapped, wherein we don't put such kind of restriction that your operation name and the root element name must be matching. But right now, the way it was able to trigger subtract operation is because of that root element. And if you will observe, as I can show you again over here, your root element name and your operation name are exactly matching. And that's why it was able to trigger that subtract operation. So the point is, even using HTTP client connector also, you can consume the SOAP-based services. Now let's try to do one thing. I tweaked few things, right? This one, I think this should be fine. But even this can be sometimes an issue. So you need to try different things to fix your issue. All right, I'll remove the / from here. It's working fine, right? So now the point is, can we use the same client connector for calling those 100 services? Yes or no? This connection can be reused, right? But if I was using SOAP, was it possible to reuse that connection? Right?
No.
Right. So the point I'm trying to say is, even you can use HTTP client for consuming SOAP services. And in many companies, you will see that they have used HTTP client, and you might get confused that why are they not using web services SOAP client? And this might be the reason why are they doing so. Any questions on this? All right. So I would request you guys to go back and try to consume maybe a different service. Okay. So let's try one more. Okay. Just to make sure you are very clear on this. I mean, consuming via SOAP client connector may not be so tough, right? That's pretty simple. Uh, so there is something like provide real-time currency details, right? We have seen this service in past also. Yes. So what we can do is first with a SOAP, right? And if you do it with SOAP, it really helps for you to understand, what are the different actions, what are the different headers, how your request looks like, all that stuff. So here there is a lot of stuff. I'll go with this list currencies. Oh my God, it is expecting so many details also. I think we'll use some simpler one. Actually, I don't know the value of all these parameters, what we need to pass. Okay. So we have a service, Celsius to Fahrenheit and all that stuff. So what we'll do is, okay, can you find a WSDL? Yes. So we'll use this one. Other one, I think that is, I don't know the input parameters for that, what all we need to pass. So we'll go for this Celsius to Fahrenheit, Fahrenheit to Celsius, right? So we give, let's say 100 Fahrenheit. So I'm expecting some output. This giving any output or not? It is saying bad request. What is bad? I don't know why this prefix will get defined like this. We should not have these prefixes with some special characters. Okay, this might be really misleading, isn't it? I don't know, this tool generated a prefix, right? You could see with X /. Now can you see the response coming back? Yes or no?
Yes.
All right. So we can go to the raw part also. Can you see soap action going here? So typically this is the header name, soap action. Yes. Can you see the content type text/XML? That is what I pass in the HTTP client. Yes. So now can you develop a HTTP client which will be able to call this? What are the steps? We'll copy the endpoint. We'll go back to the Boomi. So we'll not touch this one, rather we'll get a new HTTP client connector. So here the operation should be get or send. So whenever you want to pass a body, go for send. And here is your endpoint. Do you need to give this complete one? Not required. Yes. We'll go here, we'll go to the operation. So now you see we'll select XML over here. I'm not giving any profile. XML not giving any profile. I'm just saying return HTTP responses, return HTTP errors. In the request resource path, we will give the remaining section. And when we give the remaining section, we have to make sure that we do not add this /. Yes. A lot of people will struggle because of this. Then in the header, what all do we need? Now, let's say, first of all, I don't start with anything. Okay. I will just try to run it as is. I'm not adding anything. If I'll get any error, then probably I'll add. Okay. And then what I can do, I'll remove this over here and I'll just add a stop ship. Save. So do I need to change the request? Yes or no? Do I have the request? I do have. What I'm doing is in this, I'm just changing the request. I'll try to run it. Did I configure the profile anywhere?
No.
We didn't configure the profiles, right? All right. We come to the stop shape. So what it is saying, this document may not be found, something moved and also when you see these kind of errors, that means there is something there is some problem. It is not able to route to that object or some issues there with your request, right? This document may be found, blah, blah, blah. All right. So we'll try to fix it. So first thing I'll do is I'll go to the operation. And before even I do that, let me see here in the binding section. Where is the binding section? Can you see what is the binding section here? Is it a document style? This is HTTP binding, not this one. Yeah. Yeah. This is a document style only, right? If you see here, they have given some SOAP actions also, right? So right now, which one are we trying to call? Fahrenheit to Celsius. So we'll go to raw. We'll first see SOAP action. Okay. So now if you see here, even in this, do you see your operation name and the root element name is matching?
Yes.
Yes. So this is not a kind of coincidence. Okay. This is deliberately done that way. This is not a coincidence where root element is always matching your operation name. This has been deliberately done that way because that is one of the styles of writing your WSDL file. And when it is done so, it matches your root element and the operation name, and that's how binding happens. So I don't think in this case we would need to pass SOAP action. So you can do that. If you do not want to do that, let's not do that for the timing. Let's focus on another things. One thing we should pass is content type, right? But right now we didn't even get that error, right? Why we didn't get error? Maybe it is not able to find out that object itself. And when it is saying object, maybe it is talking about operation. So let's try one by one. We'll go here. We'll go to the request header. I will pass this text/. So we have done different things over here. We have not chosen the request profile. Okay, content type here should be. This is for response. Okay, I have not chosen response profile, but I have chosen return HTTP responses. That's fine. There is a content type which is text/XML. There is one more header which is kind of additional, which is not required. Let's try this out. Go to the stop shape. This document may be found. What is this? Still the same error, right? So it is telling this document may be found here. And what we are giving is, okay, no worries. We'll go to the connection. It is www.3schools.com. And what we added over here, we added the remaining path, right? What I'll do is I'll just move this XML over there only. Okay. Because you have to also see that where is your HTTP server hosted. Okay. Let me try with this. Come to the stop shape. I think still the same error. So the next thing what I'll do is I'll try to add a SOAP action. And these are the few things which you might need to try when you are working in real time, and you might face similar issues when you are not able to consume it. But when you're using the SOAP consumer, right, it should be pretty straightforward because it will internally take care of all these things. Okay, it will automatically create your profiles. It will take care of all the necessary headers also. What is wrong now?
Hi Sumit, can you just check the message shape once because I saw something there, W3 school.
What is that?
No, it's correct.
Okay. Actually, I've seen this error earlier also multiple times. content type is here. SOAP action is here. Resource path is. I don't think the request and response profiles may be mandatory. Let me run it one more time. I want to capture the error. We'll Google it. Object mode. What is this? I think this is some common error with some specific. This is. We are also getting a similar error, right? Object moved. Okay, just let me do one thing. Let me try few things which I can think of. I'll, for the timing, remove the complete path from here. All right. Save and close. This is not helping. All right. Is there any specific header which is going and that is missing in our request? SOAP action is there. Content type is there. So in the SOAP API, we don't see this error, right? Did we give the right request? I mean, we have given the request for Fahrenheit to Celsius. And what have we given over here in the SOAP action? These are matching, right? Some, I think this also comes in when these are not matching. So let me try to add that envelope. Oh, so I mean prologue. All right, connection is fine. Operation. So I think let's create. I think only thing which is missing is probably we didn't create a profile. Rest all is fine. I don't see an issue. Okay, let's try to do one thing. Let's try to add a profile because that is only one piece which I think is missing. So what I can do is I can quickly create a profile using a SOAP client connector also, right? Instead of creating manually, I can quickly create from here, right? So I'll create a connection. Let's say I'll name this is temporary. I'll give my visual URL, which is this one. I will give my endpoint, this one. So I'm just showing you that it can work with the HTTP client, but you may not need to do that always. Okay, so we will say expose request envelope, expose response envelope, both the things. We can choose temp. I will choose both of these check boxes. So now it is parsing the visual, right? So which operation we were calling? Fahrenheit to Celsius, right? So I'll choose Fahrenheit to Celsius. I remember that I've got this error earlier also sometime. I don't remember how did we fix it. All right, so this profiles got created. I'll just save and close. Can we try to use the same profiles over here? Yes, we can. So which one should we use here? Request. And here we should choose response. Execute response, execute request. This all is fine. XML, return HTTP errors. I don't see any other issue. Content type is going. Okay, let's give it a try. Okay, even that is not helping as I was expecting because request and response profiles giving them is not mandatory in HTTP client connector. Okay, let me try to do one thing. Let me try to call the other operation that is Celsius to Fahrenheit once. Okay, this should be more or less same, but let me give it a try. So what I need to do is I need to fix this part. I don't know why this namespace got created like this. This is really weird. You should not have all these spatial characters in namespaces. Let's say I say 100 Celsius. I'm getting response 212 Fahrenheit. So this is my request, which I'll put here in the message shape. All right. Okay. What else should I change? SOAP action, right? I'll get rid of this SOAP action. Unless it gives me that error, let me not add it because I think it will match on the basis of those complex elements. We come to the stop shape. We still get an error. This document may be found. What is that? This is really weird, yeah. I really don't know what is going wrong. At least let me read it, what it is saying. All right, we'll go to the stop shape. We are constantly getting the same error actually. This document may be found at this link, but I don't think there is some problem with that link, right? Document moved, object moved. I think there's some specific issue with some .NET based API. Maybe it is expecting something because I see a lot of people. All right. There's some auction follow redirects. Let me try this. All right. I will now go here and change this to. So I told this is for response, right? So if you saw that I changed it to HTML, your response got impacted. But I think, have some breakthrough. What is it saying? Something started working. Okay. Okay. I think I know what is going wrong. Okay. Uh, because the way the service is implemented is a little different. I think I understand it now. Okay. So if you see here, I say add. So for SOAP 1.1, this is what they have told. Okay, let's see, this is fine. So they have given that how should you call this also, those all things, which is fine. What was the error we got last time? So typically it depends how it is implemented. So I think there is some kind of a proxy server on top of the actual service, and maybe we are missing certain thing over here. All right, what is this? The following operations are supported for a formal definition. Please refer this. Okay, that's fine. Now let me do one thing. Let me add that SOAP action back. Let me get that SOAP action. So this time we are using Celsius to Fahrenheit, right? We'll come back over here. We'll try all these things out. Okay, the following, see, this is the page we are landing into, If you see that HTML page, whatever we are seeing, then this is the one. The following operations are supported for a formal definition. Please review this. Celsius to Fahrenheit and Fahrenheit to Celsius. When I'm hitting that and passing my request, this is what I'm getting. So if you see for a formal definition, please review this. So this is the same page, I believe. No worries. We'll go here. I'll click on service description. Is there any difference in this and this endpoints? I think this is absolutely same. Let me just quickly check. These are same, otherwise we might not have been getting this. We'll see. I'll give 2-3 different tries. But I think the request is not going there. There is some issue over here. Since if you see here the endpoint, how it is going as in this, but this is a REST implementation actually. I think some kind of conflict is happening. This has SOAP binding as well as HTTP binding, right? So when I'm passing it as a HTTP, I mean, we are using HTTP client connector. Some kind of issue is happening over here. Let's check here the request. They have given a sample request, which is exactly matching to what we are sending. Even the SOAP action. Are we giving the same SOAP action? Yes. If you see here, they have given that slash XML slash this. Oh, I don't see anything wrong. I am not sure though why it's not working. I need to check it out because we have exactly everything same. Anyone, any pointers, anything which you want to try out? I mean, you will face these kind of challenges in real time also. For some cases, it might work real smooth. It depends where that service is implemented. And because of the way it is implemented, sometimes we get this kind of issues. We'll come to the stop shape. Let's observe. Something is going wrong here. So we'll go back. I'll just copy this request and once we'll try with the same request. This is Celsius to Fahrenheit. Here we have SOAP action, which is also Celsius to Fahrenheit, which is fine. I'm not sure, guys. I need to check on this why it's not working. This is really weird. Actually, this has something to do with the way it is internally implemented because I think it internally gets routed to some other server and that is not happening when the call is going via our connector. So so there is an option called as this follow redirects. So we might see that endpoint, but internally that might be getting redirected to some other server for processing. And the moment I do that, it starts giving me an HTML response. All right, no worries. We'll look into this. Let me check on this, but you can try with some other services. I think this should work. There might be something I might need to pass maybe in the header, which I'm missing. Uh, it should work. I believe. In the connection, there is one more setting actually about. It's not working. I'll need to check on this. So we'll continue on this. I wanted to show expose also, but then that's fine. Though it takes a little more time, that's fine. But you can try it out. So apart from just learning about this soap, how do we consume it using soap client, which should be fairly simple. You can try with HTTP client also, because in real time, many times you might be using HTTP client connector to consume soap services, since we want to save on the number of connection licenses. So we'll continue from here next weekend. Yeah, I'm sorry about it. I didn't plan that this would happen this way, but then can't do much about it. All right. Thank you.
Okay,